Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the March 23rd, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. And so as we begin, let's go ahead and if anyone has any public comment that they would like to make. See any public comment in person, but if there's anyone online that would like to make public comment, now it's your time. All right. I see no public comments, so let's move on to approval of the current agenda. Motion.
I move that we approve the agenda.
Moved by Clifford and seconded by Michael. All in favor? Aye.
I have,
All right. Got that. And now for approval of the March 9th meeting minutes. A motion? Move to approve.
Second.
Got a move by Jesse and a second by Clifford. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any discussion?
excuse me, Vice President, this is Carol. Can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Do we take roll?
Well, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it?
It's not on the agenda, is it?
It's not on the agenda.
Oh, okay.
That's the team.
Thank you.
So, I don't know, we're in the middle of a motion and a vote. Did we,
Finish the vote.
let's finish the vote and then establish a quorum.
Good one, Carol.
Any other discussion with regards to the minutes? Thanks. Great catch, Carol.
Great, thank
All
you.
right. No discussion, all in favor of approving the minutes? Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? All right. With that, Jackie, can you take roll call, please?
All right. Michael Baker,
Here.
Jesse Bank,
Here.
Todd Byrather,
Here.
Greg Francis,
Here.
Chris Neely,
Here.
Ryan Patterson,
Here.
Tim Williams,
Here.
Carol Shook,
Here,
Cliff Winger,
Here.
Mary Winkus,
Here.
Councilmember Kinnear.
She's on her way.
Okay, thank you. And we have a quorum.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, so we will defer until Councilmember Kinnear gets here for the City Council report. Let's go to Community Assembly report.
The community assembly report is that we haven't had a meeting since last time we met. So I have nothing in particular in that report.
Ready? Do we have Councilmember Wilkerson? That's great. Hi, Councilmember Wilkerson. I'm
Hi there.
no Councilmember Kinnear yet. All right, so Todd, you want to do your president's report?
Yeah, thank you, Greg. So, first of all, greetings, everyone. Wish I could be there in person. No one told my body that COVID was over yet last week, so I think we're out of the clear, though. A couple of comments. Well, first, I just want to give praise to, to Director Gardner and all the staff. It just really has been, refreshing over the last month or so as we're going through these development code issues to see the engagement. So I just can't be said enough. The briefing session looks just a little bit different this time. The explanation there, if we didn't talk about it, was we were going through. I think I raised a question about agendas and so forth, and potentially, adding elements in the future. And in that, rereading our rules, realized we weren't doing it right. So raised the question, and that's why we're now putting the approval of the agenda, and then item 8 is discussing the preliminary next agenda. And so what that means on number 8 is, if there's something you want to raise to the attention of the commission that should be under consideration for a next time or a future agenda, that's an opportunity there. It doesn't have to be a big step. We can do it pretty quickly, but it's just an opportunity for feedback. And what I hope comes out of this is that we all have a little more visibility on our agenda and planning, especially for commissioners, so we can plan and know when workshops are coming up the following week, and we can plan accordingly if we know we're going to be in a long haul at 4:00, or if we're able to cut off after workshop. So that's all I have. Thank you, everyone, and look forward to seeing you in person next time.
Get well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. And I see that Councilmember Kinnear is here. So Councilmember Kinnear.
Hi, thanks. Sorry I'm late. I was meeting with the police, and you don't walk out on the police department. Not advisable. So I didn't. Anyway, I've been working with Spencer Gardner, our new planning director, and other city staff on establishing the process for selecting target locations for sub-area planning using ARPA money. And our criteria for selecting locations will be aligned with new market tax credit eligible census tracts. That's a mouthful. And then other community indicators that identify underserved and distressed areas within the city. Once we've selected the locations, the planning department will hire consultants through an RFP process to accomplish this sub-area planning work. I'm also continuing to work with staff on our drought response. Many of you probably saw in the spokesman last week that we're experiencing another drought year, will be experiencing another drought year. I've been working on a proposal that would codify very simple summertime water use expectations, primarily every other day watering and daytime outdoor watering restrictions. During the summer months only, we need to make sure we are protecting our river and our aquifer as we continue to see longer and hotter summers. So establishing these water use expectations is really a foundational step toward protecting those assets. And as you all know, our river is also the economic engine for our region. So it's important that we preserve that in perpetuity. So any questions? Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Actually, I think I have a question. I'm not sure if you know it. There was a bill before the state legislator about reuse of downtown parking lots and
Yeah.
kind of sales tax refund. Did that pass?
I don't think so, but I'll double check for you. I think it may roll over into next year. Not sure. I'm not entirely sure. I'll check for you.
I can update you on that. Like,
Sure.
it passed the House and the Senate. As far as I know, it went to the governor's desk and has not been signed. So I assume that means that it isn't going to pass, or at least not signed by the governor.
And if it's not signed by the governor, I'm anticipating that something's going to be, because we're pretty passionate about that, some of us here in the office, so in the council office. So I'm thinking that it may go through, something may happen next year.
Okay. Thank you, council member. And with that, let's go to Transportation Subcommittee report. Clifford.
Okay, last meeting, I brought before the commission that the subcommittee wanted to know how land use changes would affect transportation. The commissioner sent it back. I'm in contact with Colin Quinn Hurst, and chapter 4, which is transportation in the comprehensive plan, states very clearly that land use is an important input into transportation. So Colin and I are coming together with topics that we can discuss at our next meeting of the Transportation Subcommittee and bring those questions back to the commissioners here. Also, we have a hiccup, and we're going to try to get the council's connectivity person as part of the subcommittee, because she's currently doing a lot of work with CTAP, the Transportation Benefit District, and traffic calming. So we need to have her input with the subcommittee. So that's my report.
Thank you. All right, secretary report.
Yeah, a couple of things to report on. Some of you may have followed the annual comprehensive plan amendment docketing process. That went before council this last week, and all of the proposed amendments, private amendments, went forward with the full expansions. So you'll be hearing more about those. There were the city-led amendments as well. And that also includes the discussion about LU 1.3, LU 1.4 that came out of Plan Commission here. All of those went forward with the exception of 1.3, 1.4, which has been pulled out for sort of its own process because we didn't want that to, I guess, bog down the other amendments that were proposed. And so all of them are going forward. The LU 1.3 to 1.4 discussion is sort of on its own track. So I wanted to provide that update. And you'll start seeing workshops on those amendments in June. So again, were there 4 private amendments, Kevin, I think?
There's 5 private amendments.
5 private
City
amendments.
sponsored.
Yeah,
We've gone ahead and scheduled 8 workshops, just in case we do the next one.
yeah. So you'll start hearing about that in the summer. We've got those already scheduled out. Another one, and I guess this is more a question. So hopefully it's okay to have a short discussion here. We're wondering about having a hearing, or we have a hearing scheduled in 2 weeks, and we'll hear about that in a moment. We're sort of wondering who's planning to be in person going forward, and this isn't binding, so it's okay if you end up having to not come in person, but we just want to feel for who's going to be in person in 2 weeks, because we're trying to figure out if we want to hold the hearing in council chambers or here, and with some of the technology issues that have happened in council chambers, it would just be helpful for us in our planning. So it's okay, we don't have to bog the meeting down with you all giving me your verbal response right now. We'll send an email out, and if you can just indicate, but that's why we want to know, is just trying to figure out briefing center or council chambers for the hearing next week.
Todd, you have a question?
Thanks. Just going to clarify, Spencer, I think it's 3 weeks, right? Like we talked about.
Sorry, 3 weeks, April 13th. No, I forget that there's a 5th Wednesday this month. So it'll be in 3 weeks. Thanks for the clarification. And I think that's it for the president's report. I mean, the secretary's report.
Right, thank you. All right, so that brings us to preliminary next agenda. Todd, do you want to lead this off since you are the one that put this on here?
Oh, thank you. I think unless there is anything anyone wants to add, I think Director Gardner just covered it, what our agenda is next week. So really, this is an opportunity if there's something else you think should be on the agenda for the next meeting.
Todd, would you like me to read off the items just so everybody knows?
Yeah, maybe that's a good way to do it. Thank you.
Okay, so this is for April 13th again, so that's 3 weeks from today. The workshops portion is we have 30 minutes for the 6-year comprehensive plan street program draft. So this is reviewing updates to the streets element of the comprehensive plan. And then we have 60 minutes for more discussion about ADUs and some of the code changes that we're going to be hearing about today. And then at hearing, we will have a hearing. We're going to have the transit-oriented development framework, which you're going to hear about from Colin later on in this meeting. And then the design guidelines update, which was presented by Dean at the last meeting. So those will both be hearing items next week.
And maybe this is Todd. Maybe I'll add, other feedback from the commission would be if you want more time to discuss, because as a reminder, workshops and hearings are led by the planning department. If you feel there's more time you want to deliberate or just have discussion, this would be a good opportunity to request it now. Okay, thank you.
One thing that I would like to, and whether or not it's on the next agenda meeting or a future agenda meeting, I'd like us to have a discussion at some point on whether or not to create another permanent subcommittee and focused on housing. Because, worked on this a lot in the last, well, years, ever since I've been on the commission now for, I think, 7 years. We've talked about housing. And we create ad hoc subcommittees every once in a while to deal with some specific issues, but I'm wondering, former council member Mung really advocated for the creation of the transportation subcommittee to deal with the long-term transportation issues. We have long-term housing issues, and whether or not we want to create a subcommittee or something, I think is worthy of discussion. I don't know if that should be an agenda item for the future or how we would approach doing that.
I think it's an excellent idea. I think better than I discussed extensively what the right forum, I guess, for those conversations are, and a willingness to have some sort of a working conversation that's outside of the office's hearing for a workshop. And so I think that's a really great way to accomplish that. Hold up time and time to dig into some of these issues before they
I have a question.
Yeah, Carol?
Thank you. I wanted to go back to the secretary for a minute. Were you discussing or giving us information on what's coming up in the next couple of weeks for the that's going to be on the agenda?
Yes,
Or
those
okay,
were items for the next plan commission meeting, which will be in 3 weeks.
okay. Could you send out a little note on that since we're getting that information before the agenda is sent to us, please?
Yeah, the way that works currently is we send that agenda out in advance of the meeting. And we send that out to plan commissioners as well as just the general public?
Mhm.
So you do get that agenda a couple of days before the meeting.
Right. So would it be possible to get it in the next couple of days of the information you want us to?
Like the preliminary items? That would show up in the meeting minutes. So that might be the best way to do that. The agenda isn't formalized until we send it out a few days before the meeting. And so, I don't know.
Periodically, we've sent out the planning directors sent out the long range planning. That draft one that we talked about.
For the work plan?
The work plan.
Yeah.
We would send that out.
Just, once every 2 to 3 months, just so people would see kind of a long range plan and knowing that it's all tentative.
Yeah.
That was really helpful.
We can send that out again.
Yes, Mary.
Todd or whoever. How is a subcommittee formed? Because when I talked to Candace, basically she had formed it, and so it wasn't really done through the plan commission because she was instrumental in it. And
right.
I don't know if she was on the city council at the time, or so is it by council request or is it by plan commission?
I think that's up to discussion because I think planning commission rules allows it to create a subcommittee. And I think the transportation one was done by resolution by city council to kind of codify it and set who would be on it. So I think the council could approve it. That would be great.
So,
but I don't think it requires.
So the plan commission would recommend and send it to council approval and codification.
That's a possibility.
Because it also has to have a charge and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Todd?
Yeah, I'll jump in to 2 things. I'll come right back to that, Mary. It's a good question. Carol, yeah, the intent of putting this on the agenda, even if it's just a light touch, was that we could talk about it. I like that, Director Gardner, that it'll show up in the meeting minutes. We're not trying to do a formal advanced agenda like council does, but technically in our rules, if I remember them correctly, we're supposed to have some notice 2 weeks in advance, but that's a heavy ask for staff to have everything prepared. So we're trying to have this compromise of here's a touch of what we expect, and then the week or few days before the meeting we'd have all of the deep dive information if that's acceptable to everyone. Otherwise, maybe we should just reopen our rules and kind of change them however we want, if assuming we have the ability to do that. So, and then the second part, Mary, again, with just going by memory here, we do have the ability to create an ad hoc subcommittee on our own as a commission. And it is correct that the transportation one, since it's a much deeper dive into stakeholders, and the council wanted to, on my understanding, see actual representation for certain groups, so they solidified that more in a resolution. But I think there is a first step where we could just form a subcommittee on our own, and I think just as a heads up, we're gonna Director Gardner and I and Brian McClatchy, we're gonna touch base tomorrow, and maybe we can report back with some ideas next meeting, if that's okay, to see how it ties in with the current council housing action subcommittee, if I have that correct.
That was my other question. But thinking you could do a subcommittee that was ad hoc to get it started and then codify it later if that's what's required?
Yeah, if we feel as a commission that there's an additional need or just a more focused, need that complements all these other efforts, and we do have the ability in a subcommittee. The reason we would potentially form a subcommittee is to break out but make sure we notice publicly for a subgroup of commissioners, but also we're able to add other members, even if it's just engaging in one meeting, so forth. I'm sure James and others can clarify if I'm saying anything correctly, but it's a little more flexible tool for us.
I'm just a process person, just asking a
Love
question.
it. Thank you.
Along that line, if I could ask a couple questions. I've been on the commission a year now, and as I understand it, the actual comprehensive plan where we do the deep dive is like 3 years off. Is that correct in terms of the normal process where we go back through the I thought it was like 7-year.
The major update is 2026.
2026. So my question related to that, since some of the things that came up with the work over the last year was I was surprised some areas weren't in centers and corridors, Division Street, part of Monroe. And that seems like a serious gap, and it's not going to be addressed until 2026 unless we have a plan to address that. So I was wondering, how could the Plan Commission, with the help of planning staff, look at all centers and corridors in terms of maybe where they need to be expanded, where they are now?
We're actually done. They're not done.
Yeah. Division Connect is working on Division, but it's not an official corridor.
Yeah, that just struck me as a major gap in our plan, and 2026 is a long ways away. And it feels like we should address that sooner than that. So I wanted to just ask whether there could be a process step that could get us along the way.
Well, and just speaking for you, I'll just do that.
Go ahead.
When we did the last kind of incremental update to the comp plan, it was at least a year-long process. And so I would expect the major update to be at least 18 to 24 or more months to actually bring stakeholders together and look at a deeper dive into what do we want to change within the comprehensive plan. So that would be an opportunity to have that discussion. And so while it has to be approved in 2026, we'll probably begin the process in 2024.
I mean, we're already talking about it now. It feels like a long time to you, but to us, there's a ton of work that needs to happen. So we're already starting to think about 2026. I think something to keep in mind in the conversation about, I guess, adding agenda items that are of interest to you. There's council is sort of it's the adopted work program that really drives the work of the department. And so these are all great questions, and I think there's lots of things that we would love to be investigating and looking into further. But council is the one that ultimately adopts the work program. And so we really have to make sure that we're listening to council and what they're hearing and what they consider to be the important needs. That's not to say that we can't discuss what some of those options are and surface those ideas, but we don't get to just sort of ad hoc decide what we want to consider on any given, for any given meeting. We really have to make sure that we're listening to council and referring back to that work program.
Mary?
Yeah, and speaking from the neighborhoods, many of which still haven't been developed in terms of centers and corridors. Knowing that there's a number of people on city council, and Lori Kinnear could speak for herself, who keep pushing to get those developed. A lot of them never quite get on the work plan. So adding more when we haven't done the ones that have been there for 20 years, it's real frustrating for those of us who have been sitting around asking for that to happen. So I think that does go back to city council. And
Real quick.
Oh, go ahead, Mary, if you have a thought.
no, I didn't know if Lori was hearing what I was saying. I should say council member
Kinnear.
When I
Sure. Todd, do you mind if I respond to that?
No, I want you to, please.
Yes, Mary, I agree. But there's a third component. And when we have an opportunity such as transit-oriented development that the planning department and my office is exploring, and in conjunction with how STA is going forward with the city line and with BRT up division, I think that's when there's that exception to the rule. And you're correct that we haven't developed a lot of the centers or corridors that we have now. But when we have those opportunities, then we get to jump ahead and say, okay, STA is doing this, and land use and planning are so inextricably linked that it behooves us to make sure that we're jumping on board with that and making sure that we're all same sheet of music, rowing in the same direction, whatever other cliche you want to use, so that we get the best possible outcome and that we get what we are intending to get, and that is more density around these stops, and not just density, but services, and making it as user-friendly and good for our community as possible. So that's the only exception I would have. But yeah, I agree with you, Mary.
Thank you.
We'll go Chet, Jesse, and then Todd.
Okay. So I guess piggybacking off of this whole thing, Mr. Williams, I'm assuming you're talking less of an area plan and more of a map revision, like a zoning revision on the map, or are you talking about calling, say, division a center and corridor and doing area plan for the corridor?
I'm more for, well, I'm not fully informed on the plan part, but it seems like it's a logical center and corridor, and everyone seems surprised when it wasn't the corridor. And then we have a transit study coming up that's looking at that. And to wait until 2026 seems like a long time for that decision. And then the part of Monroe that wasn't dedicated struck me as a surprise too. I can't say with certainty what the best way to get to that goal, but it seems like that's something that needs to be on the near-term horizon.
And I'm just trying to sort of parse out doing an area plan around an established center and corridor, which is what I think you're talking about. Versus
Which are not done.
changing the land use recommendation on. Yes, that's correct. Just changing the specific land use recommendation to a center corridor on the map itself, and that sort of theoretically puts it in the queue, I guess, with the rest of the areas that are sort of separate processes. One potentially would be more achievable with a comp plan amendment. Is that a valid assumption?
I mean, the comp plan is going to have to be amended.
Right. So yeah, I guess that's really all that I was getting at. An opportunity for us to ask the questions about what the map is saying, and also question whether. So I think to the extent possible that if you guys are already thinking about it, workshop at some point, whatever makes sense. Things here, things that you might see that would need to be addressed or might want to be addressed, at least warrant the discussion. Our perspective to hear.
Yeah.
Okay, we need to wrap up this agenda item, so we'll do Todd and then we'll move on to our workshops.
All right, thank you.
Again, about the planning commission subcommittee.
Just a future point of conversation in that Todd and Spencer are going to meet with Brian McClatchy with regards to what integrates with the Housing Action Subcommittee.
Right.
Go ahead, Todd.
So thank you. Yeah, just to wrap this up, if this process, our rules, the dynamics between council, the staff, administration, and commission seems confusing, trust your instincts. It's taken me 6 years to kind of wrap my head around what to even discuss in this context. So, but I think the intent here is to find that little bit of space that we're talking about of, you know, the planning department and our agenda related to consistency, especially to the activities and work they do, is as discussed by Director Spencer, is very defined in the rules, in the adopted work plan. I'm sorry, you know, that is very specific. And I think what we haven't had and we're looking for is that little bit of space to serve our other role, which is advising, you know, council on items that from stakeholder standpoint that we think we should bring to their attention. And so that's where a little bit of a chicken and an egg, right? How would they know what those items are to put on a work plan if we don't have space to advise them on topics that we think are relevant? So that's really the distinction in my mind. And that's why we're trying to make a little bit of clarity between those activities that are workshops directed by planning department and hearings directed by planning department. And maybe there's space on an agenda for a little more ad hoc, if we want to call it that, work by this commission. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right, with that, we're going to move on to our workshops. Our first workshop today is continuing phase 1 of residential development code changes. We have Nate Gwynn, Amanda Beck, and Makers. Welcome, Nate.
Thank you. Hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. So Nate and I are back with you for further discussions around the Shipping Spokane Housing Code changes. So this is a follow-up from our February 23rd workshop on accessory dwelling units and lot size transitions. We're just coming back to bring you further number crunching that we did in the intervening time, following up on your request for additional information around floor area ratio, maximum building coverage, and how that kind of interacts with detached ADU size. So today's workshop will focus on continuing the discussion around those proposed changes to ADUs. As a callback for any members of the public who maybe haven't seen last month's discussion, we did introduce 7 different code changes related to ADUs, which I have outlined on an upcoming slide. And so Plan Commission had a lot of examination of those proposed changes with requests for additional information, again, around floor area ratio or FAR, building coverage, and how that kind of can be potentially a controlling factor for detached ADU size. We also wanted to circle back about the proposed changes to the short plat application process as we move closer to the public hearing stage. Accessory dwelling units, whether they are attached or internal, so basement or attic conversions, and then also detached, are allowed in all of our residential zoning districts. We do have some different requirements depending on whether the ADU is internal or detached. So we'll be outlining current regulations with the proposed changes today, and we wanted to start with internal ADUs just because we realized we kind of made a mishap last time in not spending a little bit of time talking about them. So we'll kick off our discussion on ADUs today, looking at how our proposed changes impact the internal or attached ADUs. So the proposals on screen are to increase flexibility around ADU requirements and what facets of our regulation should be changed. They were introduced by the city's consultant makers at your January 26th workshop, and then we discussed in further detail, just focusing on ADUs at the February 23rd workshop. As Nate noted at our workshop last month, these proposals follow strategies or action steps from our guidance documents very closely, which is highlighted on the bottom right of the screen, and I'll cover more on the next slide. So this list of proposals for ADUs is the backbone of what our slides will cover. I do want to just note, in case anyone is type A, we aren't going to talk about the proposals in numerical order, so don't be concerned if we go from ADU 2 to ADU 5. We will cover all of them. Our code changes are guided by these policy documents we've been mentioning in each of the workshops: the comprehensive plan, the housing action plan, the council implementation plan, and the mayor's proclamation. The housing action plan strategy A5 notes that city standards should be revised to allow for additional flexibility for ADUs. This is one of many housing action plan identified actions. The city and community can kind of partner together to promote and encourage construction of more housing. Similarly, the council's implementation plan had some action items related to ADUs as well, in line with what was recommended from the housing action plan. There were calls for easing of requirements, potentially around off-street parking, such as allowing an administrative waiver on blocks that aren't congested, revising the owner occupancy requirement. The mayor's housing emergency proclamation also lists several suggested code changes, such as removing the owner occupancy requirement altogether and allowing just greater size and dimensional flexibility. It's worth noting, again, that these suggestions align with the recommendations from RCW 3670A600, which is meant to encourage the construction of more ADUs within the municipality, but as a part of a larger program to increase overall residential building capacity. But that section in the RCW does have specific lines that address what could be done for ADUs. Our discussion at the 23rd workshop suggested to us that it could be helpful to show the changes affecting internal ADUs. And so when we aren't talking about detached units, that placement for the ADU could be in a basement, you could be converting an attic, or it could be attached to the primary dwelling. So changes in size requirements and floor calculations would add flexibility for developing these types of units, while also tightening up the city's code to align with floor area calculations for other types of units. As you can see with the chart, currently they're limited to 800 square feet, and you are not allowed to convert a full basement. Instead, we've tweaked the language to keep the maximum size at 800 square feet. Say if you're building in an attic, or rather you're converting in an attic, and you might be doing an addition to the primary dwelling, but you are not limited to a maximum size if you're converting for a full basement. We have written in language that limits internal ADUs to 2 bedrooms, and this is directly correlated with proposed options for the parking requirements, which we'll talk about a little bit later. That's on page 13 of your agenda packet. So you'll see that there's kind of a menu. It could be removing all parking requirements or requiring 1 off-street parking space for ADUs that have more than 1 bedroom. So most of the ADU proposals would have some sort of effect on internal ADUs, except for ADU 1 and ADU 4, which apply only to detached ADUs. For example, ADU 2, with removing the minimum lot size and getting rid of, it gets rid of the regulatory layer, if you will, by allowing ADU size to be controlled through development standards such as setback, building coverage, FAR, or floor area ratio, or in the case of an internal or attached ADU, it'd be also the footprint of the house if it's existing. For ADU 3, we're trying to offer greater flexibility in getting ADUs on smaller lots. So for lots smaller than 7,200 square feet, the maximum floor area ratio may be increased by 0.1 for an ADU, or so you would go from a maximum floor area ratio of 0.5 to 0.6. This recognizes that many ADUs are going to be constructed on lots with pre-existing homes. And so we're trying to see how we can allow them in the most places without really blowing open the code, I suppose. But let's turn to ADU 2 on the next slide for some more numbers that you can see on screen. As you'll see in your packet, we've proposed new language to achieve ADU 2. We're removing the minimum lot size, and there's new language that allows for the combined accessory structure building coverage on lots smaller than 5,500 square feet to be 20%. So currently it's limited to 15%, which could leave you less room to build with, though I think past approved permits prove people have made it work. We had kind of discussed if there's a minimum size that really makes something feasible. And I think some of our past permits show smaller than 500 square feet for an ADU. So I think it's really just up to what the person needs in their life if they're building an ADU. And so I think there's some flexibility there. So as staff for Excel matrices looking at the interaction of floor area ratio, maximum building coverage, and accessory structure building coverage limits, the thing that we have kind of come back to again and again as impactful for the ability to encourage ADU construction is owner occupancy requirements. Changing the owner occupancy requirement could have a large effect on ADU production, and other communities are turning away from having the requirement. And some of them are seeing increases, such as Tacoma. So the city's consultant makers presented these recommendations previously, but just thought it might be important to touch on them again. The proposals on screen try to thread the needle of varying direction from Housing Action Plan and the other guiding documents on this topic. And we hope they strike a sort of balance to recognize there might need to be slightly different requirements for residential single family versus the other zones such as residential two family, RMF, and RHD. So we did review these last month at the workshop on the 23rd. Option C.1, eliminate completely for all zones and situations, and would be the biggest impact. Option C.2 removes the owner occupancy in all our zones. And then there is kind of a call out for short-term rentals, and is likely easier from a code enforcement standpoint than option C.3, which would phase out owner occupancy only after 3 years in our residential, agricultural, and residential single-family zones, and continue to require the occupancy for short-term rentals for the duration of the use of the unit. So as long as it would be a short-term rental, that would be a requirement. The third option features idea suggested by the council's implementation plan. So we tried to give you a menu of options. We know that this is kind of a thorny topic, and we've tried to come up with options that meet all of the different stops on the spectrum, if you will, whether it's a big impact of removing it completely or doing something that's scaled back and kind of has a sunset or a phased approach with 3 years of owner occupancy. Another thorny topic would be parking. So you might be wondering why parking is being maintained for 2 bedrooms. We talked about this a lot internally. I think the thing we kind of come back to is as the number of bedrooms increase, the potential for multiple adults with vehicles increases. So whether that's a situation with roommates who have multiple cars, or it's still an active adult family member who can drive and doesn't want to be limited. We don't want to negatively impact the neighborhood, certainly if it's a neighborhood that's already congested with on-street parking. So there are already a lot of places that are excluded from parking requirements by state law. So it's an important consideration for larger ADUs and in locations where parking is not required. So I want to highlight just that option A5.1, which removes all parking requirements. Obviously, it's a little bit tricky. It's kind of frustrating for people to say all parking might be removed. Their first thought is, now my street's going to be super congested. How are they going to do trash pickup, etc. So with more than one bedroom, one parking space would still be required per option A5.2. We thought that kind of struck a little bit of a balance, because by looking at the bedrooms, the number of bedrooms, we're trying to correlate number of bedrooms with the number of vehicles. Now this could open up other questions like, what about for larger ADUs that have 3 or more bedrooms? But we hope the options in your agenda packet allow for some flexibility while addressing the situations that differ across the city. I mean, obviously we have some locations in the city where there's not a congested on-street parking situation. And then obviously we have others where it very much is a known thing. So unless there is plan commission discussion on what we've talked about so far, I'm going to turn it over to Nate to discuss ADU 1, ADU 3, and ADU 4 with a really hefty discussion around floor area ratio, maximum building coverage, and how those interact with detached ADU size.
Well, before we go on, I know I have a question. So with regards to the parking requirements, is this true for both internal and detached ADUs, or so an internal ADU, which might already have occupiable space and they just turn it into an ADU, it may bump up parking requirements for an existing home?
So we built in the requirement for internal ADUs that you would be limited to 2 bedrooms. So if you were to convert, say, a basement or an attic space, and you did go above 1 bedroom, the way we've written the code, you would have 1 additional parking space that's off-street required.
Okay, Todd?
Actually, it's all right. I'll defer to Chris. He had his little yellow hand up first. You're at a disadvantage in person if you don't have little yellow hands.
Oh yeah, sorry, you guys are sort of small on my screen.
Oh, Chris has a background that makes it hard to see the little yellow hand.
It's all right. Thank you, Todd. I appreciate it. So on the parking thing, since we're on this slide, I'm trying to figure out how to be politic about this. This makes no sense to me. The idea that we're going to have a 1-bedroom unit and then say, if we went along with 5.1 or 5.2 for that matter, you're going to have a 1-bedroom apartment, but we're not going to mandate that they have to be able to park their car somewhere. Did I read that right?
So for studio or 1 bedroom, the balance we're trying to strike is you wouldn't be required to do an additional offsite parking space, but if you go above 1 bedroom, you would be required to. So in that menu of options, we could eliminate the requirement altogether. We could go with the option of having that 1 additional.
Right. So the idea that we wouldn't say, look, if you're going to do an ADU, we love that idea, helps us with all kinds of housing issues, but not requiring a parking space just seems very unrealistic. And I get that we're kind of caught in a tough spot here because particularly in the older parts of town where the streets are particularly narrow, this really becomes something of an issue. So I would love to have a sense from the rest of the members of the commission on what their thinking is about this parking issue in particular. And just real quickly so that I don't eat up a whole lot of time, can we go back to the slide about the basement size, please? So the proposal is that the maximum size should be 800 square foot regardless of the footprint of the house. Is that correct?
Right. And then the one caveat would be if you're converting a basement, you could do more than 800 square feet.
Right, but don't those two kind of contradict each other? I mean, if there isn't, so the maximum size is 800 square feet, but we say if you want to go ahead and convert a full basement that is over 800 square feet, go ahead and do that. This feels a little bit like some of our members are like, are we creating two requirements for users that essentially point at each other and make them go, wait, I don't know what to do here. So, because it seems to me like the convertible basement sort of trumps the whole maximum size thing and makes it confusing to somebody to say, okay, which one of these am I going to do? So again, I'd love to have a sense from other members as to whether I have gone off in the ditch again, or whether that makes any kind of sense. Thank you.
Commissioner Neely, to address some of your point about the conversion for a full basement, when we workshopped this with the current planners, the reason we had to change the language to say that is because oftentimes when people do convert a basement, if it's over that 800 square feet, then they have to kind of go through these additional hoops of like creating space that's not a part of the ADU, but still is a part of that existing basement. And it just makes it makes more red tape is what they felt like. And so to make it easier, if you did want to convert a basement, you wouldn't be limited to 800 square feet. And then you'd have this kind of weird area that wasn't ADU, but was still a part of the basement.
Okay, thank you.
So we're going to call on Todd and Ryan, but any feedback on what Chris has said? Mary?
I've got a follow-on question.
Okay. Well,
Hey, Mary?
with Chris saying the parking thing doesn't make any sense, and I'm with him on that. I keep, like, when I opened up the paper the other day and read how Brown's Edition, which is very crowded with cars because there's a lot of apartments, and people are moving into Spokane and leaving Spokane because of so much car theft, car burglaries. This one was a catalytic converter, which was a final straw, and they're moving to Oklahoma. If we want to have that kind of congestion on the street and give folks opportunities to screw with that many cars, I don't think that's livable. And I think if you have an ADU, you should have a place to put the car. That to me makes sense. And I live on a congested kind of area that isn't quite wide enough for two cars sometimes, and have seen people go past and break their rear mirrors off. Some areas of town don't have enough space, and we're inviting more problems. And right now, I mean, we're to the top of the nation in car thefts and stuff, talking to our detective every time. So I think this is a mistake.
So Jesse, was your thing in response to Chris, or?
No, it was a question on the same line of questioning that he was asking, so.
So Ryan, was your question regarding what Chris was asking?
It was in response to Chris's comments.
Okay, go ahead.
So for the basement, I wanted to clarify that in addition to what Amanda said, I think the way I understand it is the reason to do a full basement conversion is because if you had to limit it to 800 square feet, the basement was 1,000 square feet, there might not be access to that additional 200 square feet by the homeowner once the ADU is put in. And so I think that's what it sounds like is the reason for allowing that full. Adding stairs is just, man, that just takes up so much extra space too.
Because that's exactly what I do is I build the ADU and then go, uh-oh, the 200 feet's at the other end.
Right, yeah. Or, you know, that shared common space, which no one then wants to use if it's at the front. And then the parking thing too, just again, one thing that no one seems to be mentioning is the person who lives in this ADU, especially if it's in a region like Brown's Edition or close to downtown, may be living there specifically because they don't have a car, because they want to be able to easily access their workplace. Or when I lived on Cedar Street, right outside downtown, I didn't have a car. And that apartment building did not provide parking because it was on Cedar right off of First. So we already have a lot of housing in Spokane that, well, not a lot. And that's the thing. We have some housing in Spokane that doesn't currently have cars parking space, and we're not expecting all of a sudden those parking spaces to come from nowhere. And if we require on-street parking for every single one of these, especially in areas, I mean, as you can see down at the bottom of the slide, state law exempts minimum parking requirements within a quarter mile of frequent transit. Brown's Addition is already going to fall within that as soon as the city line is completed next year. So, I mean, it might be a moot argument to include Brown's Addition in this parking requirement discussion.
Hey, Todd, are you, thanks, Brian.
Yeah.
Are you in response to what Chris was saying?
In some way, probably, yes.
Okay, well, because I have a direct comment to it, so.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Greg. Yeah, I'm patient.
Well, with regards to the basement, and to me, the way Amanda explained it makes perfect sense as far as, you know, when you partition it out, you may end up with unusable, completely unusable space. So it makes sense to be able to use the entire basement, or at least as much as you want above 800 square feet. So that's my answer on that. And with regards to the parking requirement, I'm supportive of 5.2, where, you know, if you have a 2-bedroom that, yeah, maybe you need a parking space, but, you know, I live right next to transit, high performance transit, and I think, you know, and I would fall under that state law as well. And that, to me, makes sense. You know, I have an aging mother that might want to live there, and she's not going to be driving. And if I had to set aside a parking space for her, I might not be able to do it at all. And so, to me, I want to leave it up to the individual to make the determination: do we provide off-street parking or not? So, and that's just my take on it. So Todd, you were next, as far as, unless anyone else has a response to what Chris was asking.
Commissioner Bank, do you have a comment?
I had a question, but I'm in line behind Todd.
Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
All right, thanks. It is related. So first of all, thank you, Amanda. I want to say that it's you planning department gets put in a very tough position on these types of issues, because you're just taking fire from all directions. So so my comments will be hopefully to try to give you some cover. So the 800, what I heard was, when we talk about size of ADUs, I think there are arguments from some that it needs to look like a garage, like an accessory unit. So that's determined or dictates size. I think what I heard, Amanda, you say was it also, at that size, is kind of that one, potentially 2-bedroom. Then we get into arguments of, well, then that means more people, that means more cars. And what I challenge everyone with here is, I don't agree with that. I think it's easy to make that argument. I'm not saying planning department's making that. I'm saying that certain advocates would make that argument. I say we decouple this, because it's more people doesn't necessarily mean more cars. It only means that right now because our predecessors handed us with really bad urban design that is car centric. And we assume that that has to happen then. If we actually provided walkable neighborhoods with amenities near our homes, then we would start to eliminate cars. So I think we shouldn't try to solve that. That's a big problem. I'm not saying that's not there, but I don't think we need to solve it within ADU reform, that we're solving our car centric, you know, lifestyles. So if my ask would be, let's decouple that and then take that bigger problem on somewhere else. And if so, then you know, we're making that same argument that is already being made within a quarter mile, you know, of transit and so forth. But we're just saying that let's start with that as a given everywhere. And then yes, with these dividing up spaces, I mean, you start to trigger other life safety, fire codes, so forth. 1 hour fire ratings, things like that. So we just need to, I think, eliminate that altogether and not put that a requirement on an internal ADU, whether it's attic space, basement, or anywhere. Why does that really matter unless you're going to make the argument that now we're somewhere in duplex land and we're having problems there? It's just, if we blur our eyes, we're saying we're making 2 units within one unit, within one building. So thank you.
Hey, Jesse?
Okay, well, I'm glad you brought that up. So my question was going to be on that specific internal size limit. So I have an attic that is 900 square feet. How is a basement in this rubric different from an attic?
So we're looking at the definitions in the municipal code as far as like floor area. So if your basement is 4 feet below grade, then that's not going to be counted. And also, I think there's some concern if you're converting an attic, because we do have a requirement. I think it's 6 feet 9 inches if you're doing an attic space.
Ceiling height?
It's livable.
Right, but I have that there. It's our master suite, my wife's office at this point. But if we wanted to make a separate entrance to that and convert that into an ADU, we would still have the 100 vestigial square feet size problem. It's just not the basement, it's on the 7th floor.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, okay.
I guess I don't necessarily need you to answer that right now. I just sort of wanted to raise that flag of how are different spaces within an existing structure that's conforming to FAR or grandfathered in, legal non-conforming. It's not changing the footprint of the space. I guess I'm not entirely sure why we're necessarily even putting limits on the size of an internal space, so long as it's not impacting the external space. I understand that there's other lot coverage requirements, et cetera, that come into play when we're talking about detached ADU. And I just don't fundamentally, if we're going to make this allowance for basements, I just don't understand why we're not making the allowance for anywhere in the house if it's not affecting the 4 walls of the house.
Yeah, I can see the same issue with basements as with attics. So I think that you make a good point.
So that was that question. I just wanted to go back to the owner occupancy requirement thing, if we can touch on that for a second. Just gonna hit all the hard points here. What is 3 years a magic number somewhere? What happens after 3 years? So say my neighbor builds an ADU, does the 3-year requirement, and then moves out and rents the main house as well as the ADU. And then I would like to build an ADU, and I'm now subject to the 3-year requirement, but my neighbor isn't somehow, and I don't understand how that's a fundamentally different condition. You're still, if you're wanting to, I guess I want to understand better the purpose of the ownership requirement. What is it you're trying to achieve? Because if it's just going away in 3 years, what is the point of even having it? 3 years isn't, as we know, a very long time.
I believe the 3-year number had come from the city council's implementation plan. I don't remember, was that also mentioned in the housing action plan? I don't believe so.
No, it came from the city council's.
It just seems like a strangely arbitrary number to have a requirement burn off like that, and then you have the situation that you were trying to avoid by putting in the owner occupancy requirement originally in 3 years down the road, and I just don't see what's changed in those 3 years.
It does sort of maybe soften the impacts a little bit. It's a baby step toward full implementation, and then everybody who's built an ADU thus far, who's been there for more than 3 years, can now, they're liberated. They can go sell their properties now. So
sure,
it's just going to inhibit the ownership part of it.
So can you go forward, Nate? Are you controlling the slides?
Yeah, well, Amanda is.
Okay, Amanda, you want to go forward one? just to make it clear that we've got sort of three options on the table. Maybe you already know that.
Yeah, I was just trying to get to the,
Yeah.
what's with 3 years.
So
and why.
I think the rationale, there's nothing magic about 3 years. I think the rationale or the concern that arises from is that you'll have, if you don't have some kind of owner occupancy requirement for at least some period of time, then you'll have investor money coming in, buying these up and creating, more rental properties essentially. I think that's where that arises from.
Although for the article that you sent around, that's already happening.
Well,
That's what you said.
yes, that's true.
You could argue that's a good thing.
So,
Yeah,
well,
yeah.
and that's true too, but I'm just pointing out, that's where I think council, that's why they inserted that requirement, is to try to have that concern.
And we know the council is interested, as they told us, so we kind of need to have that as an option.
For sure. And I'm just sort of trying to probe as why it's 1 year versus 5 years versus 83 years. It's sort of end up with the same thing at the end.
From a process perspective, this was kind of an important issue for me, and I think the staff's done a great job of outlining things, giving recommendations, but I'm, given the urgency of the situation at Spokane, I think that C.2 makes the most sense. And so how in the process will there be a time where the planning commission said, this is our recommendation on these to the city council, and then they can decide what they want to do, but
That's right. Yeah.
but I would like our recommendation to not be the one in the bold, but the C.2. That's my personal.
So, yeah, what's on the left side there was sort of the pulling out from the council's implementation plan and the housing action plan. So those aren't necessarily the recommendations. I mean, what's on the right is the options that are really going to be.
So we'll have a chance to vote or discuss both.
All right, Todd? And then we'll just move on as soon as Todd's done.
Sorry. So on the point of ownership, that implies now we got to go to chapter 17A and look up what an owner means, right? And so there are 8 different definitions of what an owner of a real estate property interest is. And so it just starts to get really confusing, and maybe it's all covered there, right? I'm not the best qualified to say, but I'm the grantor of the deed of a trust, or I'm the holder of a fee title or life estate, or I'm a person having a right of possession and control. But this gets messy. What happens in our reality now where I can't afford a mortgage, I can't afford so forth. I have an ESG investor come in and want to hold it for 3 years. What's my relationship to that? I'm leasing to them because that's the model that works when, construction costs and real estate are so high right now. I think we just got to, I'm not taking the political state. I just think we need to clean this up and just say, remove owner occupancy. I think we're twisting ourselves around in knots here, trying to define what this is. And I think what's the basic question we're trying to answer here?
Okay,
I already have the question. Yeah.
And then we got to move on to Nate. Okay, go Chris. You.
Thank you. Sometimes it can be difficult to hear. So I want to associate myself with what Todd just said. This again, purely pragmatically, the big issue we've got is housing. How do we get more housing quickly, pragmatically, and this definition of owner, I got to go along with Todd. It sounds like the death of 1,000 cuts. I'm all about 110C1. Let's simplify it and move on. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to turn it back to Nate.
All right, thank you. So Nate Gwynn, the City's Planning Department. Thanks for having me, and good to see you all in person. So wanted to, now that we're going to talk about all of the items, all the recommendations, wanted to that apply to all of accessory dwelling units. We wanted to return to these 2 remaining recommendations that apply just to detached accessory dwelling units. So as we discussed last time, we noted that there were maximum size and additional standards that can affect detached additional or accessory dwelling unit size. So you have the maximum size cap or potentially additional standards. And so similar to what other cities are doing, Spokane is looking at increasing detached ADUs from 600 square feet to 800 square feet. So there's several examples. And then like Vancouver, we also have a cap on the percentage of floor area at 15%. And so for building coverage, that's Spokane's like Vancouver, but for what that means is that a lot that's 5,000 square feet in size has a maximum building coverage of 750 square feet. So that doesn't match with the proposed increase of 100 square feet for the lots. And so for smaller additional lots, so as Amanda mentioned, we're looking at eliminating that minimum lot size. That would mean that it would be even smaller. And so as a result, there's this new 20% coverage that's proposed for lots that are smaller than 5,500 square feet, which would accommodate that larger detached footprint up to 800 square feet. So wanted to return to that and also return to floor area ratio. So at the top row, we have the example of, or the reason to revisit this is to recall that we currently have the existing standard 0.5, which is reflected on the top row. And then, as you'll remember, the proposal is to increase to 0.6 FAR on smaller lots, and for the same reasons. So it's not so intense as the FAR of 0.1 that's across the bottom, but somewhere in the middle. So ADU 3, that's the item that would apply both to internal and to detached ADUs, but it affects the detached discussion quite a bit. And obviously for different lot sizes, and the different lot sizes here are exemplary of residential single family and residential 2-family zones. And incidentally, for residential multifamily, residential high density, there is no FAR limit. So we're really talking about residential single family, residential 2-family zones. So with an average floor area for new houses that are built, 2,400 square feet, that could be using much of the allowed floor area again for these smaller lots. So there's only 2,500 feet available for both the house and the detached ADU, then you'd end up with a smaller than average house. And the median, if that's helpful, according to the 2020 census, is 2,261 square feet, so slightly smaller. And then Rocket Mortgage says average for new houses has been dropping since 2015 and was down to 2,300 in square feet in 2019. So we're looking at about 2,400 square feet for a new home. And so also we recall this as a control, again, both on internal and detached ADUs, but it does influence that detached discussion. And so the existing standard in the chart at 0.5, we see the combined house and ADU is 2,500 square feet for the 5,000 square foot lot. And the existing, there is an exception. Some development, there is a bit higher floor area ratio for attached housing in some locations. But generally, again, that's 0.5. So the proposal is to increase that to 0.6 on lots that are less than 7,200 square feet in size. That would accommodate this new home size and an ADU on a smaller lot. And then building coverage is defined as the total amount of ground area that's covered by structures. So it's slightly different than floor area ratio. And again, the existing standard is 15% for accessory dwelling units. That ranges any kind of accessory structure. That ranges from about, and then for all structures, it ranges from about 40% to 50% in the residential single family, residential 2-family zones. So combining floor area and building coverage, here we see that development can have a higher floor area and still have the same coverage. So the existing floor area ratio of 0.5 across the top, with building coverage that ranges from 50% for smaller lots, and then less for larger lots in these zones we're talking about. again, we're proposing 0.6 in an increase for FAR on smaller lots with accelerated dwelling units. So hopefully that is helpful. And then looking at the kind of the distribution of lot sizes. So this is the residential single family zone. There's similar numbers for residential in terms of the distribution for residential 2-family, where you see that peak at about 6,000 square feet to 7,000 square feet, that range. But you can see that there are very few lots that are less than 3,000 square feet. And then in between 3,000 and 5,000 square feet, incidentally, that's sort of the high-end target range for residential single family at 1/10 of an acre. So in the future, we may see more of those. We may see a shift to more numbers in that range. But again, it's a minority of the total of lots that currently exist. So really, a majority of the lots in the residential single family zone are going to fall in that 5,000 to 8,000 square foot range. And this shows where the test lots that city's consultant makers used. This is kind of their sizes. You can see that there's distribution and range of the different sizes. So their lot 1 was 3,000 square feet, and their lot 2 was 4,800 square feet, sort of on that smaller side of the majority of the lots. And then the other two, 3 and 4, are shown here. These are all shown at the same scale, but they show a variety of different sizes, different applications of the built environment, and different neighborhoods in the city. So on smaller lots,
Can we, yeah, do you have a question, Todd?
Yeah, just Nathan, with your knowledge, just with basic, maybe go to the next one, which is basic setbacks, dimensional requirements, like what do we average across the city? 60% just buildable area within the setbacks before we kind of.
if you took the building footprint and then subtracted that from the lot size.
Yeah, just with 5-foot side setbacks, 20-foot, that kind of thing. It's just we must be like in 60% range usually. Does that sound right?
Well, the building, yeah, there's the control of the building coverage standard that doesn't apply to all impervious surfaces, but so doesn't apply to driveways. But the buildings themselves are not supposed to be more than half the lot, the area of the lot. Right.
Yeah. I'm just trying to make a point that if we just look at without just with our dimensional setbacks, we're already we can only build on 60% or so of typical parcels across the city, right? Somewhere in that range.
60% of parcels.
I'm making that number up. I'm asking what is that number just on average across the city when we have different, because it depends on the lot size, right? Parcel size. But we always have these 5-foot setbacks and these, 10, 20-foot setbacks on the front and so forth. So realistically, the buildable area is going to be 60, 70% already without any additional requirements.
I don't know if you know the numbers off the top of our head, but the overall point I think you're making is with a front setback and side setbacks, we're already limiting the area that you can build on by some amount.
Correct.
So the 50% coverage, it's sort of redundant in a certain sense, right?
At certain parcel sizes, right?
There's some areas that we're not allowing to be built anyway.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then you have to have your 15 by 15 foot recreational square too.
So yeah, that's currently, I think currently it's a 12 by 12 square. But yes, proposed, that sort of relates to the other changes to, to single family. Duplexes currently don't have a required outdoor area, so that's kind of a blind spot. But yeah, for single family and attached housing, it's a minimum 250 square feet of outdoor area. So yeah, so just kind of forging ahead into the discussion so that we can hopefully, get some commission feedback on the size, maximum size change. So the 3,000 square foot lot, this is where we see on these smaller lots. This example is 1,300 square foot house, but typically see houses range in size from 1,000 to 2,000 square feet. And note that the alley benefits the access on these parcels. So this isn't necessarily the layout that you would see on a parcel that did not have an alley, but the highlighted values here show they're using the floor area ratio increase that's proposed on these smaller lots and the coverage changes that are proposed to 20%. And neither of these examples meets the current minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet for accessory dwelling units. So this is all sort of hypothetical, but the changes there are highlighted that are bringing even larger ADUs to these sites. So if the floor area ratio was changed more to 0.7, then that ADU on the small lot could be 47% larger. And I'm just noting this because we're going to cover it a little bit. With the same house size, so up to 700 square feet for ADU, and still meet the minimum outdoor area and maximum coverage required. And again, the floor area ratio applies to both the house and the accessory dwelling unit, but not to the garage. And so there's different lot sizes and different examples, again, based on these typical lot sizes, typical situations for residential single family zone. Again, recognizing that this is a small minority of the typical parcel, but some of these older areas of the city have these 25-foot wide lots, 40-foot wide lots, and so forth. So the reason to look at floor area ratio here is because at the February 23rd workshop, the commission members were interested in how big the accessory dwelling unit could be without the upper cap on that floor area. So taking that cap away and just looking at floor area itself and kind of controlling the house size of 1,200 square feet, of course, that could change. But you can see that with the proposed increase in floor area ratio to 0.6, that the accessory dwelling unit, in addition to the house, could be bigger than the current upper cap of 600 or proposed for 800 square feet. So that cap really relates to keeping the use and structure accessory on the site, and then limiting occupants under health and safety regulations, and then also ties into the parking required in terms of the number of occupants. And then on the right side, see how the building coverage also plays in. So that the very far right column, that only affects the first, only limits the building footprint of the detached ADU. So for model lot 1, that's that 3,000 square foot lot. That has actually a larger coverage in the model because the house footprint is only 893 square feet instead of the 1,200 square feet that's assumed here. So this 1,200 again is a variable that depends on the house footprint, but could be just basically made the same here to illustrate how it increases when the footprint can change depending on the size of the lot for the detached ADU. So the next slide looks at a change to 0.7 FAR for these lots. So the changes are bolded. In this case, in the model, again, the consultants were only able to get up to 475 square feet for the accessory dwelling unit on that model, that first test lot, with a 0.6 FAR, floor area ratio. So that's the reason to look at 0.7. So with a slightly higher floor area ratio of 0.7, equating to 300 additional square feet, that would perhaps make that accessory dwelling unit more likely to be constructed in the first place. This would affect, again, a small minority of lots, but it could be a deciding factor on those lots, on building on those lots, and would allow for more units to be likely to be built. So again, we see how a cap on the floor area, for example, 600 square feet, 800 square feet, or some other number, could help control the size of the accessory dwelling unit on sites with smaller homes. And the idea for the 0.7 was supported by the consultant up to 5,000 square feet for lot sizes, in addition to the 0.6 that they've already proposed for up to 7,200 square feet. And again, it was for that reason that more units may be built. So I think that's we did a lot of back and forth with the consultant about this and wanted to bring this to you guys for consideration. And then a reminder of how we're, then there's the larger lots. So lots 3 and 4 showing larger homes. So this is the same exercise with the larger footprint, and the coverage of the house on the lot is about 2,400 square feet for lot 3, slightly larger for lot 4, but and then you see the floor area in the model is an additional 1,000 square feet. So these homes are quite a bit larger, and another reason to use that 2,400 square feet again is for that average new home size. So just looking again at what happens if you apply 2,400 square feet to these larger lots. So 7,200 at the small end of that, where the FAR floor area ratio doesn't change. So we're just looking at existing floor area, existing building coverage. Again, you see the accessory dwelling unit size being perhaps exceeding, what people might think of as an accessory size. So see some larger floor area that remains after subtracting a 2,400 square foot house, and then some larger footprints than
Todd, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. By the way, Nathan, thank you for putting out there that 0.7 after, I think we discussed that last time, and I don't know if that was the driver, but thank you for exploring that with the consultant.
Yeah.
I think to your last point there, I have a fundamental question for the commission, because a lot of this, I think everyone's obviously on board for providing more housing. So let's ask the question, does the commission, what is the commission's stance on whether or not a dwelling unit needs to look like an accessory unit, accessory like a garage, right? Because that's a lot of, seems to be the driver in words like control and so forth, that we're trying to make a dwelling unit look like a garage, just to be blunt about it. Does anyone else have that question or concern?
Go, Ryan. Well,
yeah, go.
My similar thought immediately after hearing this, talking about accessory and making sure that it still meets the understanding of accessory, is people can have 1,200 square foot attached garages to their home, and this is not under the same consideration. And all of a sudden, if that garage isn't attached to the house, then it has to fill some other accessory, size. So I think it's similar to Todd's as to why are we concerned about accessory structures being any different than the primary structure.
Jesse?
So I share that question also. I think to me it makes sense that we're sort of like getting close to allowing duplexes on all lots in RSF zones, which is, to me, it seems like where the dividing line between the accessory and the non-accessory is, and it doesn't feel like maybe we can go that far with the conversation yet, but we're still effectively allowing 2 dwelling units per lot. So it feels like kind of a gray area for me. But wanted to thank you guys, both staff and the consultants, for looking at this. I think I brought up a point at the last hearing that we had on this is, can we govern these sizes effectively with FAR and with some of those other things? And I think you've just shown that we can pretty effectively. So I guess I would raise a subsequent question is, what purpose is the maximum size really serving? And again, we're just splitting hairs, 860, 900 square feet, something like that. Couldn't we just say it can be only X percentage of the main house, therefore preserving its accessory appearance so that we don't go down the duplex route? But it seems to me with that little tweak, saying it can't be 20, it has to be no more than 25% of the house's floor area or something, in combination with these tools, seems like we've got a really viable way to keep those uses accessory. And again, I think there's still a question whether that's an important thing or not, but it allows more flexibility, which is I think what our goal should be, is allowing that flexibility to be able to build more. And, so if I wanted to go to 960 square feet and I've got a 2,400 square foot house, it's still an accessory. It's still very clearly an accessory at that stage.
Example in Portland.
It has to be, so, and that's,
Right, yeah, capped at 75%.
That's kind of what you're talking about, right?
yeah, so I was curious if that was one or the other or both on this.
Whichever is,
Yeah,
is it larger or whichever is smaller?
yeah,
probably.
okay. So I mean, I guess, again, and this graph makes my point for me, why would we not just look at percentage of house size, FAR, and lot coverage, and keep it there? Why do we keep this extra number that could potentially be inhibiting to people attempting to do this?
Can I just add some perspective? In talking with the current planning staff, the reason that they like a number to give out is that they get calls all the time about ADUs, and it's like, well, how big can mine be? And then it turns into a big conversation. And it's sort of hard for them to say, you get 800 square feet if it's up to some kind of formula. And I'm not necessarily advocating one way or the other, but that was one consideration that went into some of the thinking here, is that having a number makes it easier to communicate to the public about what the possibilities are. So that was just.
And I can see that. I guess I would also say it's just as easy to say, how big is your house? 2,000 square feet, great. That means you can have 50% of that.
Well, but then you could ask, well, does that include the attached garage? Or, I like kind of the Portland model where it's like 800 square feet or 75% of the house size.
I'm just trying.
So I know my baseline is 800 square feet. And then permitting could say, well, we know you could do 800 square feet. It'll take more of a conversation to figure out what your maximum is. That's fine. All right, we got about, Colin has graciously ceded some time. So we're going to have about 15 more minutes left for this topic.
Yeah, I'll press on. Yeah, that was I guess that is the question to come to, and to make sure that we had this guidance. This, somebody said, what is the problem statement last time? And so, we're really trying to follow instructions from the guidance documents. So, we pulled out these different instructions that seem to relate pretty directly. We want to allow flexibility in construction of ADUs. Again, comprehensive plan guides the long-term physical growth of the city, and as well as other aspects such as urban design, and provides for a variety of housing option, and then the options, and then the housing action plan, which was done, in conformance with the comprehensive plan, pulled out, that this was an option for small households and extended family, and then the engagement suggested that to better encourage accessory dwelling unit development, that these standards should be revised for additional flexibility and encouraged using existing incentives and new assistance. So that's the question on the proposed increase to 800 square feet. It sounds like there's discussion about, again, we're having a different cap, and so perhaps this is reflected in the hearing draft as an alternative to the increase to 800 square feet is to have an alternative cap of a percentage of the home size. This is kind of what I'm hearing, unless I'm not asking for a decision, of course, because we're not at a public hearing, but some direction on how to proceed to go to public hearing is needed really quickly, given that we have about 10 minutes remaining.
Yeah, Todd.
I just want to restate that fundamental question of accessory dwelling unit. Who is putting the accessory requirement on it? So, I'd love to hear stakeholder input from the public, so far, that testimony of why does a dwelling unit have to look like a garage or a shed? I think it's really important to understand then why we're going through all these other measures of percentages and sizes and so forth. Thank you.
The comments, so I don't think it needs to look like a garage or a shed. I mean, hopefully. I know mine wouldn't. I don't have a garage, that's why. I do have a separate, well, a couple of separate questions. In looking at the code, it talks about the detached ADU must either be combined with the garage or be the only detached structure in the rear setback area.
Yeah, that's that rear 25 feet.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
if I have a shed, a literal shed in my backyard, can I not build an ADU?
No, you can build one attached to it if it's in the rear 25 feet. If it's not in the rear 25 feet, you can build a detached ADU.
So if I have a little 8x10 tool shed in the corner of my backyard, I cannot build a detached ADU.
It could be attached. I mean,
With a breezeway, right? But could it be a detached?
Something more than a breezeway, probably, but yes, you can still. I think the point is to not have somebody living in the backyard and have other accessory structures in the backyard that aren't attached. I think I mean, it seems to me that it's encouraging people to, consolidate their accessory structures.
Seems like a constraint to me that's an unreasonable constraint. When I think of just a small, I have a little 8x10 shed for storing my lawnmower and my gardening tools. And now I either have to attach that shed to my detached ADU or do an attached ADU.
Furthermore, what does attached mean? If you slide your shed over so that it's touching and a run?
Put a breezeway between the shed and the ADU.
But, is there a spec for attachment there? This is an attachment, and this is not an attachment. I agree, it sounds.
I mean, it just seems like maybe exclusion for a small utility space would be reasonable.
Yeah, I think maybe we can revisit that.
So are you suggesting maybe we could come forward for the next workshop? Because we have one more workshop hearing that we can maybe try to address that in the next workshop.
So yeah, it's a little sticky. I mean, if we want to stay with the hearing date of April 27th, that will be 2 weeks from the next workshop. So we have to have our notice published on that day. We have to have a hearing draft prepared. So if we could address it as part of the hearing draft somehow and flag it, strike it, and flag it at the hearing, get testimony on this particular issue, that might help time-wise. So we don't end up in May with the public hearing.
So is this about the sheds?
This is about all of it.
Okay.
I think the more hindrance we place on this, the less ADUs we're going to have. The more complicated you make this for people to implement it, the fewer homes we're going to get out there.
Chris?
Yep, I'm awake. So, contrary to what you may see, so on the shed thing, obviously that's not fully cooked. I mean, the idea that somebody is like, okay, I want to put an ADU in my backyard for Aunt Martha, but I've got a lawnmower, shed out there. Everybody in my neighborhood on South Hill has something in their backyard with a lawnmower in it. I'm the only one that doesn't. And I got to build one this year because I got no room in my garage for all the stuff I need to take care of the lawn. So we need to go back and revisit this idea that if I've got a shed in my backyard for my lawnmower, I can't put an ADU in it. Todd's comment about what does an ADU look like? And does it have to look like a shed or what have you? we touched on some architectural aspects last month or something like that. What concerns me here goes along with the comments that I think the song I've been singing all day, which is keep it simple. The comment I just heard about don't make it complicated because they won't build the ADUs that we need. And we need ADUs. There's not a question of, I mean, Spokane needs this housing. It needs it now. And so how do we make this as simple as possible for somebody to make this happen without running the red tape gauntlet? But at the same time, we have to have settled, to Todd's point, we got to have settled that the style police aren't going to come along and get on them about the fact that their ADU for Aunt Ada doesn't look like their lawnmower shed. So how do we either remove any verbiage that defines what they look like while keeping all the safety requirements and so on and so forth? How do we do that and keep that simple? Thank you.
Hey, Carol.
Thank you. When you have a minute, I wanted to go back and make a comment on the owner-occupied portion of what we're discussing today. Or should I make it? Okay, great. I was thinking that the reason that the city council would like to have the 3-year owner occupancy, probably, if I remember correctly, it has to do with, and I think someone mentioned it today, about businesses or people renting out their properties as rentals. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my thought was, and they don't know how many rentals or B&Bs there are in the city, but my thought was, would it be possible to, when our taxes are due, the assessor's office could send out, when they send out that statement, or even 6 months before, to address that, they can ask the people, or ask the homeowner, do you live there? And if they are both properties rented, or do you live in one, or do you not? And if they don't live in one and they're renting both of them, then that would be an indication that they need to apply for a business license. And perhaps that's an area that the city could address, or someone could address.
Okay. I don't see anyone's hands up. I have one more comment. And looking through the existing code, there is another use. It says an accessory dwelling unit is prohibited on any site with a home occupation. And I'm thinking of a low intensity home occupation. It is like a home attorney or a counselor or something like that. They're precluded from having an ADU. I'd like to strike that personally. I mean, I think we want to move into a situation where work at home is an acceptable thing and it works, and you can still have an ADU to support that. I understand where, I looked at what home occupation was defined as, and it doesn't include things like, an auto body shop or anything like that, on these higher intensity uses. So I don't see why we need to preclude someone having an ADU simply because they have a home office. I mean, it's home occupation, not home office. It's a different thing. So anyway, that's just my comment. I don't know what other thoughts are.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
not this day and age.
So I just want to come back to trying to help Nate out with his main recommendation. I kind of walked in going, yeah, I'm for the 800 rather than the 600 and the FAR to 0.6. That made sense to me. And then we've had the comments about simplicity and other cities doing this percentage thing. So now I'm kind of wondering, if right now I'd say, yeah, I support these recommendations, but is there a better one that hasn't been fully articulated that's simpler in terms of using the percentage of the house size? And that's where I'm kind of scratching my head going, well, there's some new thinking going on here. So I'm just wondering from those that have more experience in this area, do you have a specific recommendation that might be better than what's proposed here?
That's why I like the Portland model.
Yep.
Can I just add a comment on that?
Feel free.
Lot coverage specifically is at least in part designed to address concerns about stormwater. And so that needs to be a control, regardless of what else happens.
Yeah.
So there will be some complexity here just because there are certain aspects of the code that are addressing more than simply the size of an ADU.
Ryan?
I wanted to express my agreement in the simplifying the home occupation also stood out to me, and as well as the single accessory. The reasoning of, well, we want people to consolidate, and my question is, well, why? Why do we care if they have a one-car garage and a separate ADU? Also, if that, I guess that's one of the things we could send back is there an opportunity to allow some flexibility above 800 square feet that still meets the other building area and FAR rules, just to provide some additional flexibility for larger lots?
Just make it a type 2 and send it to the director.
Approved.
Go ahead, Nate, you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I guess what I'm hearing is, it sounds like the Portland's example may work, but I think in this case, commission members, a lot of commission members are saying it should be 800 or 75%, whichever of the main home size, whichever's more. So it could be more than 800 square feet. So that still would represent a significant increase in what we currently allow. It would be a departure from the kind of the accessory nature of the accessory dwelling unit. But I just want to make sure that I'm hearing you correctly, that you'd like to see these scale up as the parcel size scales up to 800 and beyond.
Yes, I personally would love to see that. I'm not necessarily sold that 75% is the right number. I think there's probably a couple of layers of extra analysis that needs to be done there, but the underlying point of increasing the flexibility or allowing on a case-by-case basis size departure from the 800, I still come down on the side of why do we need the limit at all? Your point is well taken. And so if that's what it needs to be to have this or that, I just want to see some path to additional flexibility on a case-by-case basis, should it be warranted.
And I wasn't advocating for 75%. I was just advocating for, is a percentage ratio a simpler implementation? Of course, Mike.
Well, go with 75 because that's what we've been talking about. And you have a rather large house on a rather small lot. And you still use 75%. Where is the green space? Where is the setback? It doesn't.
We still have the FAR limit
space. Still governed by FAR and lot coverage. So there's that backstop also.
Yeah, then it's not the 75%.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't know that 75% is the right number.
Yeah.
Which opens up the whole.
That just becomes a theoretical maximum within other constraints that are there.
But that's not easy to say on the phone to somebody. I don't think that simplifies it. I guess what I'm saying. If you say up to 75% on a small lot, a big house, people are going to pencil out something that isn't going to work. That makes sense.
Yeah, and then there's the example of this, the reverse example of this small house on a large lot.
Yeah. Yes.
Because we have a lot of 8,000, 9,000 square foot lots. And yeah, some of the post-war neighborhoods, so like Shadle, Southgate, some of those examples where the accessory dwelling, or the accessory dwelling units, 75% of the home size might help cap that. But or 800. So, or an alternative. So,
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying, it's not simple, November. So I think trying to simplify is overly simplified. It's still going to take some calculation.
Okay, so there are a couple of other topics I wanted to get to. Looks like we may not have time. The short plat notification item, we think is, we haven't talked about since January. There's been some new commissioners since then, I think, Commissioner Neely, Commissioner Patterson. So we think we'd like to bring that forward in the hearing draft along with this. This is separate, will be a separate ordinance. Also, the lot size transition, which we talked about in a bit last time. But as far as accessory dwelling units, it sounds like there's the size question. There's the question about the home occupation and the
Backyard setbacks.
the rear setback. The other item we wanted to kind of make sure we talked about was the roof setbacks and wall and roof height. I think though, I get a sense that maybe we don't have to make a decision now, but get a sense we could address these as part of a hearing draft, come back for workshop, perhaps in 3 weeks and get all of these again. And maybe that would be enough time and still schedule the hearing, you think? Keep the hearing on track for April 27th for these 3 topics. It's sort of what, I guess, if I could, wrap up with that and before we make this discussion.
Brian?
Oh, I just, even though I wasn't here in January, I did talk with Spencer about the short plat notification and read through the details. So I don't think we need to hold up or, expend a lot of time unless Chris also wants to talk more about it.
So knowing that we have one more workshop to discuss these items, I mean, do people feel that we could be ready for hearing on the 23rd?
27th.
27th.
Certainly think on the lot size transition from short plat, we could decide on dimensional standards for.
I mean, if we tentatively move forward with all 3 and then during the workshop, our next workshop, we go, okay, this just isn't done yet. We could defer the ADU, but still move forward with the lot size transitions and short plats at the 27th hearing.
Yes, I guess I'm wondering about does that impose additional workload in terms of like splitting it up and then having to write a new hearing draft for 2 things and.
Yeah, I think as long as it's not deferred, it doesn't.
Yeah.
create extra work.
I don't want to create any extra work for you, Nate, because you've been working really hard on this. So if we have to keep them all together in order to make that easier on you.
Yeah, there's efficacy in noticing them together. So there's 3 ordinances under one notice, 1 public hearing. Then that saves the department costs and notification fees and not that that's a guiding factor. So big
Question, I guess, on that, are we, knowing that this is going to be a long discussion, can we just go dispense with 4 o'clock thing? We shouldn't be through everything.
Dispense
with 2-4 time slot, can we run longer?
on the day of hearing? Or you're saying next week?
Yeah.
Well, what's controlling that, not next week, 3 weeks,
Yes.
is that we have to provide notice for the hearings before we actually go to workshop. Is that right?
Pretty much, yeah, unless we wanted to extend or, take the first meeting in May, for example.
Yeah, or
Push
push
that
the
to
hearing
here.
back.
Yeah, and then we'd have more time to tweak things next workshop.
Yeah, so, pushing the hearing back to May is.
Yeah, I think he's talking about
the best.
Yeah,
that's the for them not having to do 2 things and renotice.
We're locked in at 4 o'clock on the 13th because there's another hearing coming in. Yeah.
Carol, you had a comment?
It just seems as though there's still quite a bit of conversation and questions, and certainly we're going to think about this. it seems like it would be easier rather than splitting the hearings to just move it back a couple of weeks rather than go to the expense of having creating that extra workload and expense. That would be my suggestion.
So pretty much everybody concur pushing the hearing back to the first meeting in May so that we can have an opportunity for basically 2 workshops if we needed to. Chris?
All 3 of these topics require as much public input as we can get and as much time as we can get as realistic, because these are the kinds of things that your average every day run-of-the-mill, mom, dad, and the family dog, these have impact to them, right? Can they put an ADU in the backyard for Aunt Ada? Short plat, is the city of Spokane now, not communicating as fully as it used to? You remember that came up when we were discussing those lot size translations. All of these are the kinds of things where people are like, we need to make sure we're giving the folks the opportunity to comment on these. It's not sort of roof pitch arguments that the average person frankly doesn't care about, but they do care about these topics. So if I would be all in favor of pushing it back and making sure we've got all of our ducks in a line, we've got enough time, and we're not A, wasting money, or B, wasting time in order to get these out so that people have an opportunity to really understand what we're talking about here. Thank you.
Okay, so you have your understanding the situation. Carol, you had one more thing?
Hi. I just thought about one other thing as he was making those comments. Besides it being on our city website, do we have someone, and I haven't noticed, I'm sure it has been, but do we have someone that can do an article in the newspaper so that, again, it can continue to create awareness in our citizens' minds, and we can start fielding maybe, they can start maybe writing letters, and we can get it in a packet or so, just so that we can kind of see what the chatter might be.
Well, it has been public outreach.
Yeah, we've done some pop-up events, and we're doing now a weekly sort of blurb in the community update newsletter, which has several thousand people on, they get that. Been notifying the housing action plan stakeholder lists and anyone who's signed up. And then we do have another pop-up event scheduled April 6th, I believe.
Yes, April 6th.
Yeah.
Is it possible?
Yeah.
Thank
we
you.
Can,
is it possible?
I think as Carol, if it helps as we schedule the hearing, or the hearing date becomes more certain, that might be a good time to try to generate some earned media with the media outlets, and then do a press release and that sort of thing. But we'll coordinate with our communications team during that time.
Okay, we need to move on from this topic. Colin's been extremely patient. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Amanda. With that, we're going to move on to TOD regulatory framework, final draft review with Colin Quinhurst. Again, thank you for your patience.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here in person to see you all. Thank you. If I can get the technology right.
Could we all do a little golf clap for Todd, who looks like he couldn't be more miserable if he tried? I mean, all afternoon, I've been wanting to go, can I get you some soup, Todd? Can I get you some tea? You just look. Todd.
Thanks, I think.
We'll send a little wellness emoji here.
All right. There we go. So I just muted myself, right? Okay. There we go. Got that out of the way. All right. Yeah. I've been here with this group a few times, calling for Nurse Planning Services, talking about transit-oriented development. And right now we have our final review draft of this report for the study. So this is fifth time here. It's online now, and I'll go through a couple pages of it. But it should be a pretty short presentation. This has been for this group a few times now. So, but the overall purpose is to integrate transit-oriented development and accessibility improvements with high-frequency transit as it goes in, so that our regulations align with our transportation investments. And we wanted to test how we do this in a specific study area. So we took a section of the city line that's being built right now, and looking at the area that's not really geared toward transit-oriented development currently. So outside of downtown, outside of Brown's Addition, we're looking at the eastern stretch of it. As far as how the study was organized, we did have a consultant as part of the team, Center-Based Planning out of Portland, Oregon, and they had a sub-consultant, Angelo Planning Group, that specialized in zoning and land use regulation. And the process was that we had 4 phases, and each phase went through this kind of series of city approving the work plan, center-based planning, carrying out a draft, and then taking that draft work product to a stakeholder committee. So a steering committee made up of neighborhood organizations, stakeholders, neighborhood council representatives, residents from the neighborhood, but also a technical committee. So partner agencies, SDA, SRTC, and other departments within the city. And so now we're at the final phase of this process. So a closer look at the project area, heading up through the Gonzaga campus and the Logan neighborhood, and then east along Mission Avenue through the Chief Berry Park neighborhood to Spokane Community College. So there were really 4 principles guiding our work throughout this. The first was to create a safe and accessible station environment so that at each station you felt safe while you were there. The second is to create destination and station access so that from that station you can get to neighborhood services, to your residents, and to community centers. The third principle, so that second principle related to mostly like connectivity improvements, multimodal transportation so that people can walk and bike safely to and from each station. The third principle was creating mixed use, dense transit supportive development in the areas immediately around each station. And the last principle was aligning the policies to make all this work. As we went through this process, a fifth principle really emerged that's timely and it's equitable TOD. And this specifically calls out affordability as a key aspect of transit-oriented development. Just building TOD doesn't mean that the people in those neighborhoods benefit from that development unless you strictly make affordability a part of that equation. So these other aspects, density, transit, walkability, those are all baked in already, but this fifth principle adds equitability. So the process, we took every approach here with inform, involve, collaborate, using different tools for each strategy, from a project webpage to online surveys to stakeholder workshops, and then our committees. And this is a quick rundown of the process we went through. So at each phase, we went to our stakeholder committee, our technical committee, and planning commission. And we checked in twice with city council and twice with each neighborhood council. The work product that came out of this is, one, is that accessibility, that destination station access, is creating a safe multimodal network along the route, specifically as the core, station to station access, so that as you're going along the corridor, you feel safe walking and biking to each station. And then a supporting network of auxiliary facilities getting you through the neighborhood to that corridor. And then we got into station area types. So we classified each station area in that quarter-mile range. according to type. So there are center and corridor stations in the red. There are institutional stations in the blue. Some are a mix, like at Gonzaga, where it's in the center, but it's also on the Gonzaga campus. And then of particular interest are the stations at Napa and Regal that are neighborhood station nodes. So kind of that mixed use center for the neighborhood that's really focused around the existing neighborhood. And that's what we found were really the opportunity areas for transit-oriented development. Those light yellow stations, residential neighborhood, they're single-family residential. They're geared toward that. They're zoned for that. They're not going to change a lot towards mixed use, besides some kind of minor improvements at those stations. But these three other stations were areas where there isn't a lot of transit-oriented development, and there's a lot of potential for it to grow. And so getting to that last piece, that transit supportive policy piece, this is the piece we wanted to focus on in our last presentation for this group. And, Jason Graff from Center-Based Planning came and did a 45-hour presentation last month. And so he really got into the details, but this is an overall summary of what we're proposing here. The first is to modify the TOD supportive zones that are already out there along the route in these station areas. The second is to create an overlay zone to apply those modifications. So the modifications we're proposing don't apply citywide, they apply specifically along high frequency transit lines. And the third is to do selective rezoning in the TOD opportunity areas. So around those station areas where there's opportunity for TOD, there are still some zones that aren't transit supportive, that need to be rezoned. General commercial zones that still allow drive-up uses, parking lots, and industrial zones that aren't really geared towards mixed use. And then the last recommendation is that at areas where we feel like we need more information, Mission Avenue is one, where we need to make that a safer corridor for everyone getting to transit, but we need more information about impacts of potential lane reconfigurations on circulation throughout the neighborhood, but also throughout the region, because that's a key corridor with one of the few river crossings, arterial river crossings in that area. So going into each of these in a little bit more detail, as far as the transit supportive base zones that we'd like to modify, so to bump up a little bit, these are the zones within the project area: center and corridor, form-based code, retail, RMF, RHD, and then neighborhood mixed use is of particular interest because we haven't used it yet. It's on the books, but we haven't used it. So we saw this as a great opportunity to bump that up and gear it towards those neighborhood node stations at Regal and Napa and really make this a zone that supports transit within neighborhoods. So I'm going to switch over real quick to one of the tables from the regulatory approach memo. And this really gets into the details of what this would mean for each of these zones. So it goes through each aspect of each of these TOD supportive zones. Building height was the first one up, and looks at modifications to those near high frequency transit. So bumping up building heights from, say, 55 feet to 70 feet, depending on the zone, and then getting into details like FAR or parking requirements, setbacks. So if you're interested in looking at some of these recommendations, they're in that regulatory approach memo that's on the website under Appendix 2 of the document. And the main action plan is the summary. The appendixes get into more of the details. So going back to the slideshow here. So what that overlay zone would look like, what you're seeing in the bold outline are those TOD supportive zones right along the transit line. So those are the areas where we'd be applying those modifications. So bumping up building height from, say, 55 feet to 70 feet or adjusting parking requirements. And then the hashed kind of less bold outline is a transition overlay zone. So it would be making modifications to residential zones that are within a quarter mile to a half mile of the transit line. So the key modifications are in those bold TOD supportive zones, but we'd also look at a transition zone that addresses residential near high frequency transit. So the things we're looking at in broad strokes are addressing the role parking and building heights play in limiting TOD. That combination in a lot of these zones doesn't quite pencil out to create TOD, where building heights aren't quite high enough and the building parking requirements are a little too high, where it just doesn't make sense to build a multi-use, mixed-use building in that area. The second broad recommendation that gets into more details in that table I showed you are to maximize incentives and allowances to promote affordable housing and pedestrian-friendly street environments. And that goes back to the design standards. So we're recommending design standards that address design, orientation, access, and frontage to promote safe and active street environments. And then these rezone opportunities are the two spots where we have general commercial, McCarthy Athletic Center, and then industrial at the Regal Station, where we want to rezone these to something like center and corridor or neighborhood mixed use. And then the last step is to carry out focused plans and studies. So in the blue, you see a sub-area plan focused on the McCarthy Athletic Center station. And that's what Martin Murphy is going to be working on the TOD implementation grant that we have from the Department of Commerce. So that'll be kicking off next month and going through 2023 to carry out a planned action ordinance in that area focused on implementing some of these recommendations. And then that Mission Avenue piece in red is that Mission Avenue corridor study to assess what some of these recommendations mean for circulation in the area. So the action plan is on the website now. You can go and look at it and get into the details. Next steps are coming to Plan Commission on April 13th for a hearing. And what we're looking for is a resolution eventually from City Council recognizing that the study occurred, generally supporting the recommendations. What we aren't doing at this time are making changes to any zones or any code. It's just recognizing this as guidance that we should carry forward in future work. And we take that forward to council in April, May, follow that up with the TOD implementation project that I just mentioned. So that's it for me today, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Mary?
Yeah, who are the neighborhood folks, so I can check with them in advance and make sure everybody's cool with this?
Yeah, Karen Bird from Logan Neighborhood, Lindsay Shaw,
And
Pauline Gardner from Chief Gardner,
I have lunch with Molly tomorrow, so start with.
and Doug Salter.
Okay.
Chief Gardner.
So there were to be zoning recommendations later on implemented to help support this. Would those have to wait until the comprehensive plan in 2026? Or are you envisioning that this may be a council priority that would come up sooner than that?
What we want to do when it fits into the work plan is go back into those neighborhoods and do more detailed work with the residents in each of those station areas. Say that these are the zoning changes we're considering, really get into the details as we propose any code changes. So it could be a comp plan amendment, but it would be a follow-up process working with neighborhoods.
Yeah, and the TODI grant that we have that you mentioned Martin Murphy working on will be a sub-area plan with land use changes embedded in that. So a portion of it.
Isn't that what Council Member Cadero was talking about when she gave her report?
Yeah, I might have multitasking.
She mentioned TOD planning, and that's one of the things that's going on.
Yes, but we have a grant from Commerce for this specific.
She was talking about our.
She's talking about our.
Oh, yeah, that's a different one.
Different.
That's a different, okay. Thank
Hey.
you. Thank you.
Todd?
Yeah, thank you. Great job, Colin, and everyone else. Terrell, I think just mentioned it, but she's in a microphone dead area for us. My question was going to be, how does this overlap with potential sub-area planning, which could be considered a comprehensive plan update, right? I think I've seen it on blue here. Is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, so Todd, maybe I'll summarize what Terrell said. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're
Mine
correct.
Yeah.
So the TOD implementation framework, which is the study that Maren is going to work on that Colin mentioned, that is taking a subsection of this corridor that Colin studied, and we're actually going to do a sub-area plan. So there will be land use changes and a comprehensive plan update related to that.
And I think that's be great just for especially new commissioners to understand that is one mechanism to do land use changes and comprehensive plan update is that sub-area mechanism. Correct?
Yep. So that would, we'd anticipate to adopt that in 2023. So that would be ahead of the next major update.
All right, other questions for Colin?
Great plan.
Yeah, looks great. Thank you very much, Colin.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to that hearing. All right, well, with that, I was gonna say, you don't have to get up. Bam, bam, we're done. Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned.
So are we going?